Well, thank you, Kim. That was truly amazing for just sharing some life lessons and just really opening up personally my eyes to how much of a better person I can be. And thank you for really your time this morning with this. So thank you very much, Kim.
But
So before we bring up our next speaker, we just want to take a couple minutes just to share a little bit about ourselves. So I absolutely love my role. I'm very fortunate to be the program manager of Canadian Blind Hockey and the general manager of our Canadian national blind hockey team. Canadian Blind Hockey is a national non-for-profit sports organization for the parasport of blind hockey in Canada. We have impacted the lives of children, youth, and adults who are blind and partially sighted through our programs, which include our school field trip days, our youth teams, our development camps, our regional tournaments, and our biggest flagship Canadian National Blind Hockey Tournament, which I would like to add, we are celebrating our 10th anniversary this year, March 22nd to 24th, and would love to see everybody out in attendance. Our program spans this entire country from coast to coast to coast, all while supporting Canadian hockey players who are blind and partially sighted. From playing on the pond to proudly wearing our country's jersey, our community is growing. We have elite members that represent our country, but then we have some individuals that are just here to play the game that they love. And we truly encourage in developing these children, youth, and adults to feel what it's like to be part of a team, to own a jersey, and yet to play our country's game. At this moment, I would love to introduce to you a member of our Canadian National Blind Hockey team. Joe Fernazier is going to share a little bit about his story, how he got introduced to the parasport of blind hockey, and what it meant to him to be the youngest Canadian ever to play on our national blind hockey team. Joe, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so my name's Joe. He said that already. But when I was 3 years old, I fell in love with the game of hockey, as a lot of people in Canada do. I lived it, breathed it every single day. I was on my backyard rink, going to school, going home, unfortunately watching the Toronto Maple Leafs play, but that's a whole other story. At 10 years old, actually at a rep hockey tryout, I started missing passes. I started running into other players. School came around within the span from August to the end of September. In 2 months, I had lost 96% of my vision and was diagnosed with a rare eye condition called Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy. My dreams of playing hockey were done. My dreams of driving a car, being a regular person, out the window. I fell into a kind of a deep depression, lost everything I had. I was 14 years old. My dad tells me, Joe, there's this tri-blind hockey youth session, the first ever youth session in the GTA. I didn't even really want to go. I was like, Dad, I'm done playing hockey. He pretty much threw me into the car and made me go. It was the best decision that he ever made for me, though. After finding out about blind hockey and getting to play the sport that I loved again, I figured out that there was a national team, and I made it my goal to become the youngest player in history to ever make it. And at 16 years old, I was named to Team Canada, and I've now won 3 gold medals. But for me, blind hockey isn't just about shooting a puck, scoring goals, winning games. It's about a community with other visually impaired people and people that are successful that were put in the same position as me, people that know what it's like to be visually impaired. So now I'm a public speaker, social media influencer, because I want to show everyone with disabilities and without disabilities how important sport is, because I think it's really important to be a part of that community. And I hope I can help that today. And I think this is what this is all about. So that's kind of my story.
Thank you, Joe. From the young individual I met at 16 years old to watch you mature and grow to the man you are today, truly is a testament to our organization and how proud we are of you and every other participant. Canadian Blind Hockey is honored to be a part of the collective, and we are excited to be here today in a room full of leaders who are committed to making a change and making the sporting landscape more inclusive and accessible. The Ontario Parasport Collective and this summit are possible because of the financial support of the Ontario Trillium Foundation and the Government of Ontario. The OTF has made a huge commitment to Ontarians with a disability back when it was awarded the Ontario Parasport Collective its largest ever grant back in 2018. We are thrilled to all be here together to share and celebrate the impact of that initial investment. Next up, we would love to introduce Dr. Darda Sales. Darda is a past Paralympic athlete, current sport administrator, and a management team member with the Ontario Parasport Collective. From pulling from her own lived experience and the findings of her PhD research, Darda will present on the importance of the work that has been done by the Ontario Parasport Collective. At this moment, we would love to call up Darda.
Good morning. Ooh. All right. So my name is Darda Sales. Typically, that is what I go by. I use doctor in two instances. One, when I'm giving a presentation and I want to sound important. And two, when I'm writing a scathing email to Good Life on the inaccessibility of their gyms. I'll let you know how that works out. I have a meeting on Thursday with them. But more importantly to me are the three letters that come after my name. My post-nominal letters that I am very proud to place behind my name represent that I am a Paralympian. I competed at 4 Paralympic Games, 3 in the pool, 1 on the hard court. I was very fortunate and honored to bring home a little bit of hardware, and people would say in all my sporting career, I was quite successful. By my definition, and for what I was seeking from sport, yes, I was successful. But today we're talking about what is sport for a much broader audience than just myself looking to compete at the highest level. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to be speaking from the letters from both the front and the back of my name, because in this conversation, both are equally important. Now, I'm here to talk to you about why the OPC has done what they have done. But before we get to the why, we're going to talk about the what. So what is the OPC? The OPC was founded in 2015 as a legacy project from the 2015 Pan Am Games. And in the lead up to those games, it was recognized that there needed to be a coming together of the organizations in Ontario if we were going to truly have impact, lasting impact on the system of parasport. So they got 24 organizations, PSOs and DSOs, provincial sports organizations and disability sports organizations, came together and decided that they were going to have this mission and collective vision as they moved forward. So their vision was to create and promote equitable, inclusive, and quality physical activity and sport experiences for Ontarians with a disability. Their mission that they set out to accomplish was as a united group of committed and engaged partners and individuals acting as a central hub, we will lead, connect, and support the alignment of the parasport system in Ontario. That was where they started. That was in 2015. And as I said, it was a legacy of the Pan Am Games, which at that point in time, I was still an athlete. So I was not involved at the beginning of this great journey that's happened over the last 8 years. But I got to engage at those games and I got to compete on home soil. I got to see the enthusiasm for sport that Ontario had. And I got to have the honor of wearing the maple leaf on home soil. That is not something that a lot of athletes get to do. And so it was so amazing that Ontario, Canada, Toronto came together to host this amazing multi-sport games at home. And one small piece that lives on is the OPC. Now, the OPC, when they set out, what does this mean? We have this great vision, it sounds great, but what does it actually mean and what are we actually going to do? Well, they sat down and they said, okay, well, let's break this big project into some smaller sections so that we can tackle things a little more focused. So they decided to come up with pillars. So the pillars, one of the first pillars is education. Education to increase child and youth participation in parasport and awareness of opportunities through leveraging partnerships with the education sector across all levels. We're talking mostly about children and getting children into sport. That's where most people start, not all, but most start in school. So how do we impact that sector? Next, they looked at leadership. those that support the athletes. So how do they develop the current and future capacity of sport leaders, including the coaches, officials, classifiers, and administrators who lead parasport in Ontario? How do we make them better? If we can make our leaders better, in theory, we can make the system better. The next pillar was pathways. So pathways is to promote effective entry and quality participation through asset mapping, first involvement and transitioning, and alignment, and integrate the parasport pathway for Ontarians. That's a lot. That's a lot. So in fact, they decided, let's break this down even further. We're going to have 2 pathways. We're going to have pathways about pathway into sport and participation. So how do we get people in? How do we get them playing? How do we get them engaged? And then pathways 2 is how do we get them to the next step? So for those that want to do the competitive route, what does that look like and how do we support that? At the beginning, there was also the hosting and competitions pillar, and that was to develop appropriate competition structures and a hosting strategy for parasport in Ontario. Now, this pillar is a little bit of a victim of COVID. There was no hosting. There was no competitions. So instead, what they did is they restructured and decided to disperse within the other pillars some of the different projects and responsibilities that this pillar had taken on. So some of the things that was happening in hosting and competitions got shifted into leadership, and some of it got shifted into pathways. So while there is not a specific hosting and competitions pillar, the work that was began there before COVID continues. Now, with the OPC, and we do have these 24 organizations and the people who've come and gone and ebbed and flowed throughout the last 8 years, there have been 3 individuals who are the workhorses for the OPC. These are our project managers. There's been 3 in the past 8 years. There has been Jennifer Bruce, who I saw earlier. Thank you, Jennifer. She was our first project manager who put her heart and soul into this. Next was Kylie Wazard. And Kylie was actually a student with me at Western. We were both doing our PhDs together. And then when she was moving past and graduating, she moved into this manager role. And she was the manager when the Trillium grant came in. And she had the very difficult job of figuring out how that all works. And she worked tirelessly and so many hours. And we are so thankful for Kylie and the time that she spent with us. And lastly, we have Johnny Byrne. And Johnny came in and I feel like he gave us the structure that we kind of needed. I think we were a little bit, a little scattered. And Johnny came in and he gave us structure and systems. And we are very thankful to Johnny, and he is somewhere hiding in the room, or he should be. So if you see Johnny, please give him a great big thank you, because he has worked tirelessly. He's actually been working 2 jobs for the last couple of months to get this summit going before he moves on. So we are very, very thankful for him. So that is the what, that is a little bit of the who, and now let's talk about the why. Why are we here? Why did the OPC start? Why is any of this important? Why are any of these pillars important? Well, I would say that what we're mostly trying to look at is we're trying to figure out this. How do we get athletes? And there is a typo. I'm just going to admit it now. Tried to fix it. It was already put on the internet. So there is a typo. So how do we get athletes from the pond, I was a swimmer, or the playground to the podium? How do we get them to reach success? This is my definition of success. As I said, this is not everyone's. So what does that look like for someone else? And how do we get them there? How do we get individuals with disabilities involved in sport? How do we keep them involved in sport? And how do we move them through sport? Because one thing that I don't think anyone can argue with me on is the benefits of physical activity and sport for everyone. So how do we make that happen? So the very first thing we have to figure out is the first steps into sport and physical activity. How are people getting engaged? Well, there's kind of the typical things that people think about. You engage with your families. You go and you play. For me, when I was growing up, we were at the pool. We were at the beach a lot. I played Little Mermaid for hours. Blue lips, blue fingers, had to get pulled out when it was time to go home. That's where it started for me. There's also municipal programming. When people think about activities for their kids, well, we'll just take them to the local pool and they'll do lessons, or they'll play basketball, or they'll do whatever. That's just how, really basically, when we think about sport, that's one of the ways it happens. There's also our private physical activity and sports organizations. That's how that competitive level. You know, you have a kid, as Joe was saying, in Canada, you play hockey, right? So if you have a kid, you just take them to the local hockey team and you sign them up and away they go. Start at 4, but you get them in there. Or we do it at school. School is a really big one. When you think about school, you think about, well, there's phys ed class every single day, and there's recess, depending upon the structure, 2 to 3 times a day. They're outside and they're playing. Of course, that's an easy place for people to get involved. Unfortunately, for children with a disability, that is not the case. From my own experiences, I can tell you that recess was a place where I was picked last every time. If I was picked, I will tell you there were a few benefits. One, I am one heck of a double Dutch turner. You need 2 legs to do double Dutch and hop side to side. That didn't work, but I could convince them to use 1 rope. I could play, but 2 ropes is more interesting and more exciting. So I am a pro turner. In gym class, by the 3rd grade, I could score keep with the best of them because I was not allowed to play. When I was in school, I didn't get asked if I wanted to play. I got told, there's the bench. Gym class for me was where I could have had the best time of my day because I am a very physically active individual. I love movement. As you can see, I can't even stand still up here. And yet I was just mandated, there is the bench. I did have a few skills. My sister played basketball, so I used to play basketball with her outside, and I was okay. We had a basketball skills competition at our school that in the 4th grade, when I was 9 years old, I won. Thank you. I got to represent my school at the city championships for basketball skills. It didn't go as well. It wasn't a good day. I still have memories. But I came home and the next week was basketball team tryouts and I got cut. I'm 9 years old. I've proven I have more skill than anyone else here, but I can't run as fast as the other kids, so I got cut from the team. So school, maybe it's not the best place for kids to get involved in sport and physical activity. I would love to tell you that things have changed and that it's totally different. I'm years old, and so it's been a while since I was in school and things are better. However, at this point in time, I can't tell you that. As part of the work that I do with Swim Ontario, we have a Pools to Schools program where we have elite paraswimmers who present virtually in classrooms across the province. And it is an awareness and education program that we run. And part of the presentations, the athletes talk about their time in school. One of the athletes talks about how they were told they were a liability at recess and gym class and were not to participate. Another individual talks about how at recess kids didn't want to play with them because they took too long to learn the rules. So unfortunately, people who are closer to their school ages, it's not quite the most positive experience yet there either. However, that is why we have the education pillar. The education pillar has worked tirelessly to try and impact what's happening within our schools when it comes to the physical activity of children with impairments. They've done this through a few different ways. They started out working on a program where they brought in schools to the Ability Center, and they had class field trips, and they exposed them to what parasport was. And that was a great initial project. And then it evolved again. That darn COVID came in, and that whole let's do things in person went out the window. So they had to pivot and figure out what they were going to do next. And so they shifted and they looked at how can they make partnerships with AFIA, who is here, and they came up with a project to help the teachers with their actual phys ed classes. And there's going to be a presentation on inclusive physical activity in schools today at 11 that I highly recommend you stop by and listen to. And in that presentation, they're talking about how can they make change? How can they make it easy for teachers to include. The default cannot be for a child to sit on the bench. And this is a program that is helping make that change. So I'm very hopeful for and very excited that they are getting up and going. Now, I came in to be involved with the OPC in 2017 when my high-level competitive days were over, and I was looking for what to do next. And I knew that I wanted to have an impact in parasport. And I knew that I wanted to make things better for the next generation. I wasn't 100% sure what that was going to be, but I knew that research was going to be the way to start that for me. And so I was very fortunate to become a student of Dr. Laura Meisner at Western University. And I went in with the idea of researching the coach's role in the life of an athlete and their health. As most PhD students do, I took a little bit of a right turn, and I went to a meeting for the OPC in 2017. Laura was involved in the initiation of the OPC, and she was like, "Oh, you kind of do parasport. You should come on and check this out." So I went to a meeting and realized that this is where there needed more attention. This is where there isn't enough research. This is where we need people who are passionate and involved in the system to be asking the questions and finding out the answers. So as part of my introduction into the OPC, they were looking to find out, you know, we want to make an impact on the system, but what is the system? What does it look like? And what are athletes experiencing? So from that, I engaged in actually my first dissertation study. And it looked at what is the experiences of para-athletes along the pathway in Ontario. And Swim Ontario had been one of the early members of the OPC, so there was that connection in. My own personal connections with the swimming world made it a little bit easier to find participants to talk to me, so that is where we started this study. And so one of our first findings from that study was about where are people learning, or what's happening for them to learn the fundamental skills needed for engagement in parasport. And so obviously it was learn to swim because we were talking to swimmers, but you can take that generally. Where are people finding out, and how are they engaging in those first initial experiences in sport? I can tell you it wasn't happening at school, unfortunately, but it is happening. And for swimming, it is happening in one-on-one environments where there is an instructor who can take the time to spend learning about the individual and how to adapt the lesson to the abilities of the athlete. It's also happening more in specialized programming. And when we say specialized programming, I mean like a program that specifically says on it for individuals with disabilities. Unfortunately, there aren't one of those in every town, and there's not one of those at every pool. But that is where the participants in the study were telling us, this is where I was successful. When someone took the time, or I had a program that was built for me, that is when I was successful. And why were people doing the Learn to Swim? A lot of people were engaging in Learn to Swim for rehab purposes. And I made this particular slide 5 years ago when I presented this research to the OPC. And I just put rehab up there, and I wrote about it in my paper and everything. And at 4:30 this morning, when I was awake in my room, the thought to me came, why do we call it rehab? So I did a little Google search, as someone does when they're awake at 4:30 in the morning. And I discovered that rehabilitation means to resurrect or to return someone to their normal life after illness or addiction. I don't think it worked, because I've done a lot of swimming, like a lot, and I've played a lot of wheelchair basketball, and my leg has not grown back. So I have not been rehabilitated. I think we need a new word. I'm not sure what the word is, but when we engage in sport, yes, there's amazing million things we're going to do, and we are going to enhance the functioning of anyone who engages, but unfortunately, we're not returning you to anything. And also, let's think about it. Do you want to return? That's another presentation. Now, for me, how did I get involved in sport and how did I learn how to swim? Well, I splashed around, like I said, a lot, but actual swimming lessons for me happened at the Pathways Children's Center in Sarnia. I didn't initially do swimming lessons. Initially, I went to physiotherapy, and physiotherapists are amazing people. Preface that. Physiotherapists are amazing people. They do amazing work. They are very much needed. But to 8-year-old Darda, I did not like them. I did not want to hang out with this middle-aged woman who made me bend and stretch and walk and walk and walk and walk and bend and stretch and walk and walk. I didn't want to do that at 8 years old. I wanted to do things that like other 8-year-olds were doing. And my other 8-year-old friends were taking swimming lessons. So when the physiotherapist said, you know what, Darda, I think we should put both of us out of our misery here. And you should walk down the hall to the therapy pool and you should do swimming lessons. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. That's what other 8-year-olds are doing. Perfect. And that's how I started taking swimming lessons. And yes, I was doing it for rehab, and I was doing it in a specialized program. And that's where it started for me. Now, the next step when you're looking at how do people get involved in competitive sport now, or the next levels of sport, people get involved because they hear about programs by word of mouth. From the participants in our study, only one actively searched out a competitive program. Everyone else, it was a friend or a family member or medical professional who said to them, hey, did you know that there's this program that's open to kids that have disabilities? And that's where they learn about these opportunities to take their sport to the next level. For me, I got introduced pretty much the same way. I was swimming in my little swimming lessons at the therapy pool, and a recreation therapist came up and asked me if I wanted to try something else, if I wanted to try competitive swimming. And this was when I was 9 years old, and this was literally a month after I'd been cut from the basketball team, when I was really starting to notice that I was different. And I was really starting to notice that I was not going to be included in sport in other environments. So the timing on this for me was perfect. Here was somebody asking me if I wanted to play. And boy, did I want to play. I come from a family of 4 very active, very competitive kids, and this was my opportunity to also engage and be competitive in something that was mine. And I was so excited. And I started to do competitive swimming. So these are the experiences of how people are getting in. These are the experiences of where this is starting. And this is where Pillar 1, Pathways 1, comes from. This is the moment that they are trying to see how we can impact the most. How can we smooth out that entry point? How can we get more kids involved without them having to be in a specialized program or have someone one-on-one work with them? How can we get more people aware of these programs that are out there so we can get more kids engaged? So throughout this week, there's several presentations. I hope that you will go and attend. The first one, right after I'm done talking, you're going to hear from Dave and Archie that are going to talk about their pathway and the work that they've done. There's also programming on inclusive high five today at 11. Tomorrow, there's a presentation on adapted sport and recreation in post-secondary institutions at 9:45. I love this project because I feel like it takes that entry point and makes it a little bit later, a little bit different, something we're not really always thinking about. But yes, even at university, it's a place where people are trying new things and they have open minds and they want to engage. And so this is a project that they started, and I'm really excited about that presentation. They're also going to talk about pathways to participation session tomorrow at 9:45, as well as getting your message across. How do we spread to the word about our programs? What is the words that we need to be saying? And that presentation is tomorrow at 11:15. And there's also an active start incubator. How do we get people in? How do we get them started? Tomorrow at 11:15. Now you're going to say, Darda, you're saying the same time over and over and over again. Yes, we do have sessions happening at the same time. However, in our app, we have all the slides and the notes will be there, so you can go back and review at a different date. So don't worry. You will have to make a choice on your presentations today and tomorrow, but you will get the information regardless. So that is one thing we're making sure is that we want this to be a knowledge translation or event. So this is how we are doing it, and you will be able to access those notes. So once athletes are in sport and they're engaging and they are trying to move up and maybe they want to be competitive, what is the next thing that came out of the study? Well, my first study looked at participants across the pathway in Ontario. My second study, we talked to athletes that were on the upper ends of their development pathway, and both of them came down to talk about coaching and what an impact on their experiences coaches had. And some of the comments that were made talked about there's a gap in experience and education. My coach doesn't know what to do with me. They don't know how to adapt things for me. Or there is a lack of ability to adapt or individualize the training. And this was something that was found at all levels of the sport. For me, my first coaches were volunteer teenage lifeguards. Once I've been asked to compete in sport, I went to my first swim meet. I loved it. And so my mom and some other families got together and they decided they'd start a swim team out of a therapy pool. I don't know if anyone knows about therapy pools, but typically they keep them at about 100 degrees and not ideal for training. But it's what we had. And we had volunteer teenage lifeguards that were our coaches, and they were super passionate and super friendly, and they wanted to help us, and that was great. And through my time with those volunteers, I qualified for my first regionals, I qualified for my first provincials, and I qualified for my first nationals. And I went to my first nationals, and it was great. It was very eye-opening. Definitely had small fish in a big pond syndrome happen to me because I had come thinking that I knew what I was doing. No, I did not at my first nationals. But I did come back and I thought to myself, okay, Darda, if you're going to do something in this sport, you need more coaching. Like, yes, these teenagers are really lovely and they've helped you a lot. But if you want to take this to the next level, you need higher levels of coaching. You need someone who knows what they're doing. So I grew up in Sarnia, pretty small town. It is a town that is quintessentially Canadian, so they absolutely adore hockey and all things Frozen. There wasn't a lot of opportunities for swimming. There was one swim team. So I went to that swim team and I said, hey, I'm a national qualifier and I want to train with your club. And they said, oh, okay. We're doing some tryout swims next week. You can come to a few practices. So I went to 2 practices, and in those 2 practices, the head coach never looked me in the eye once, and he never spoke to me. I was a national qualifier, and this coach had no time for me. I'm also an athlete with what we would consider a high functioning athlete. So to adapt my practices doesn't really take a ton of thought. And that was too much for him. He was not even willing to start the conversation. So what I had to do was my mom contacted at the time, the executive director of Swim Ontario and said, what do we do? And Lee Breitschneider said back, well, I will email you workouts. And you can take your daughter to the YMCA and she can do workouts. And that sounds great. Unless you know my mother. My mother is a lovely, lovely lady. All of her children are very sporty. She does not have a sporty bone in her body. She doesn't understand it. I still remember she would stand at the end of the pool and I would be swimming and she'd have the workout in one hand and the stopwatch in the other hand. And I'd be doing like a really hard set. And I would come to the wall and I'd put my hand on the wall and I'd look at her and she'd go, you're turning green. You need to stop. That's not great coaching, Mom. Eventually for me, I did meet a coach who was willing to coach me in Sarnia. His name was Dan Stratton, and he was coaching the Masters swim team. So Masters swimming is for adults, and majority of the swimmers were middle-aged triathletes. Most of them were male, lovely people. I thought I had lots of fun hanging out with them until I would go home and share with my mom some of the jokes that these middle-aged men were telling in the pool. She didn't like that so much. But what do we need to change to get coaches on board? That's a question that we're continuing to ask. I personally think it's an attitudinal change is the first thing that has to happen. We need coaches to understand that coaching is coaching. There are nuances, there are differences, there are things you're going to have to look at, but coaching is coaching. And how do we get them to see that when someone walks in and their body looks different or they function a little bit differently? So that's where the leadership pillar comes in. The leadership pillar, as I mentioned earlier, they are looking at how can we support the leaders in parasport? How do we help the coaches? How do we help the volunteers? How do we help the administrators? How do we help the officials get better? And there's been a lot of work that's been done in this pillar. I'm a little biased. I am the co-chair for that pillar. But a shout out to Mercedes, my co-chair, who has done a lot of work over the last 8 years in this area. And some of the presentations you can see to find out what we've been doing. One of them is about the coach mentorship program. So insights into coach mentorship in parasport is today at 1:40. We also have a presentation on some volunteer training and management for disability sports events. This resource that has been put together can be used for any sporting event that you are doing, not just one that has parasport written on the front, because who knows who's coming to attend these sporting events. There could be, we are out there and we do go to sporting events, just letting you know. So any sporting event that you have, this could be a training that you could use for your volunteers. We also have a really exciting survey that was done. So we are actually, this is very unique in research and it's very exciting. We have got an investigation into coaches and classifiers' perceptions of working with athletes with a disability. This study was initially done in 2018. And because of the funding and the length of this project in 2023, that study was redone. So we can actually see, has there been a shift in the last 5 years about the perceptions of these coaches and these classifiers? So that is super exciting. The last presentation is around classification, which is recommendations for parasport classification in Ontario. And that is by Janet Lawson, and that is at 9:45 tomorrow morning. And classification is something that we have got to talk about. Classification came up in both of my studies. Classification is seen as being significant by athletes. Shocking, seeing as classification is essentially the cornerstone of our sport. It is what makes parasport possible, and it is what helps for having fair play and competition. And the problem with classification is everyone recognizes that it is significant. Not a lot of people really understand the process and what it means, and what they need to go through and how it's going to necessarily impact them. There is a lot of myths and misinformation around classification that is out there. And so that's why the work that Janet is doing is so important, that her work focuses on administrators and how do we get them better organized and understanding of classification, because that's who people call and ask questions to. So with classification, part of what comes on in Canada at the moment is that NSOs, National Sports Organizations, typically are the ones that control classification. And classification is seen as being significant. So athletes recognize their engagement with the NSOs through their involvement with classification early in their sporting careers. But what happens, and what we found in the second study that I did that looked at the contextual factors of paraswimmer development, was that if you look in that circle with the organizational circle, you can see that when it comes to the athletes' perceptions of their development, the NSOs have a really important job. They're really nice and close to the center. They are significant to the athletes. The NSOs are the gatekeepers. They run classification, all of those things. The PSOs are there, and they're placed there because most athletes do not recognize that the PSOs have a significant role in their development, which is a problem. Because if you look at the mandates of provincial sports organizations, it is development of athletes. But on parasport side, the athletes aren't recognizing that they're doing much of anything, PSOs. So how do we address that? Well, one of the ways that we are doing that is with Pathways 2. So in Pathways 2, they did quite a bit of work with PSOs and development, and they gave them some finances and they gave them some training on how they can be more involved in the development of our athletes. which is their mandate. So how do we help them do it better when it comes to parasport? So to discuss some of the work that they were doing, there's 2 presentations for that panel. There is a panel on para development strategies tomorrow at 9:45, and then tomorrow at 11:15, there is a high performance athletes pathways for athletes with a disability panel that can tell you more about what is it looking like for athletes now in Ontario as they move into the higher levels of competition. So throughout all of this work that's gone on in the last 8 years, we've talked about the what, we talked about the why, and now we want to talk just a bit and talk about the how. How did this happen? How did this work in the last 8 years? Well, it was systematic collaboration. 24 organizations made a commitment to come together and work on improving the system in Ontario. They showed dedication. There's been individuals who've been in this the long haul. From the beginning, we still have organizations that are engaging regularly in what the work that's happening with the OPC. And yes, they show there was also funding. I would like to just talk about the first 2 because those are easy and everyone has those, but we do have to recognize that funding made a big difference. Funding allowed us, the funding that we got from the Trillium Foundation allowed us to do this work. But funding runs out. So how do we keep the work going when the funding isn't there? And that's part of what our discussions are going to be over the next 2 days. You're going to hear about the great work that's been done, but the work is not done. We need to keep moving. This boulder is big and it is heavy, and we need as many people as possible pushing it up the hill. And when I look across this room, I get really excited because there's so many of you here. How many of you will be here in February when there's no funding? That's what we need to know. And that's what we need to keep working towards. Parasport will be here. We can talk about all the positive things about it. We can talk about why it's important, but we need to keep working. This is my favorite quote, and this quote is what dictates my entire life. I was given this quote when I was 15 years old by my swim coach. And the quote is, "Never grow a wishbone, daughter, where a backbone ought to be." We can wish and we can hope and we can dream of an Ontario where parasport is easy to get involved in. Everybody knows about it. It's smooth sailing from the time you step in the door till you decide to exit, whatever that looks like for you. We can dream about it. But if we don't put the work in, we don't put our backbone to it and keep pushing this boulder up the hill, it's not going to change. So, over the next 2 days, as you listen about these great works, I hope what you're percolating in your mind is, how do I continue to be involved? How do we continue to connect and to collaborate to continue to make this happen? It is important. The next 9-year-old girl who comes along, whose body doesn't maybe function the way her classmates does, I want it to be easy for her to know where to go. I want it to be easy for her to feel like she belongs. And that is what motivates me each and every day. Find whatever it is that motivates you and keep coming back, because we need everyone here to keep pushing this boulder up the hill. Thank you.